Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are going to be going over the history and geography of Belgium. Belgium. I'll go over its very brief geography because it's a very small country. I'll go over a brief overview of its history, and then we'll flip through this book and I'll show you some beautiful pictures of Belgium. So let's just dive right in. Get my pencil. Belgium is located in Western Europe, kind of like northwestern Europe, in a region known as the Low Countries. And it's called that because you can see kind of this area over here is shaded blue, and that's because this region is below sea level. Now, how is that possible? How can you have land below sea level like this and have it all flooded? Well, they've built these little, almost like a dam, like the opposite of a dam, where they like fill in land and make little areas. It's hard to explain, but I think it talks about it in this book a bit, and it definitely will in some of the other books I'm going to talk about later this week. But it's essentially like reclaimed from the sea. And yeah, this area, as you can imagine, is very marshy, wet along the coast here. So this floodplain area is actually very, very useful to Belgium because it helps make it a very prosperous shipping area. You can see right here the city of Bruges, which we'll talk about a bit in its history, and over here the city of Antwerp. As you can see, like, here's the coast and here's the city, and because of the water and the rivers, Antwerp is actually a very major port city, perfect for imports and exports all throughout Europe. Very interesting, I think. Also a side note, because as you can see, there are lots of different ways to pronounce some of these places. One, I will be pronouncing them in the way that we pronounce them here in America, just to avoid any kind of confusion, because I don't want to use one version and, not the other. Like, you can see the capital city here, Brussels, has many different versions of its name. I'll just be referring to it as Brussels, for example. Number two, I am hopelessly terrible at pronouncing Dutch. So I do apologize if I butcher any Dutch words. I'm sure I will at some point throughout this week. And definitely next month at the start of September, we're going to do the Netherlands. So pray for me, I guess. I'm going to try to do my best. So if you know how to speak Dutch, or you're from a Dutch-speaking area of the world, please correct my pronunciation. I could use all the help I can get. So with that being said, let's get back to geography. So let's see, the next region we have over here is more of this flat plateau kind of area. This is where we have most of the farmland in Belgium, and it's also where we see the capital city of Brussels. And the more further southeast we travel, you can see it gets much more mountainous down here. This region is known as the Ardennes. And yes, it is high mountains, but not like, the Alps are just, skip and a jump this way. It's nothing like that. These mountains are very, very old, and they've been worn down by glaciers. So they existed during the Ice Age. As the glaciers moved north, it smoothed down a lot of the mountains. So while they are very big, they're not massive peaks or anything like that. They're very kind of like rounded, almost like giant hills in a sense. Still very beautiful and lovely, of course. But the most important geographic aspect of Belgium has nothing to do with its physical geography, but more of its political geography, or should I say linguistic geography. Because Belgium essentially is divided up into three different sections. This more northerny area is known as Flanders. You can even see it written right there, Flanders. Flanders is a traditionally Dutch-speaking region. Almost everyone here speaks Dutch. Then in the southern area is known as Wallonia. And in Wallonia, they traditionally speak French, so it's a French-speaking region. And then the third is the Brussels Capital Region, which is basically the city of Brussels and its surrounding areas. And it's kind of a mix. It is mostly French-speaking, even though it is entirely within Flanders. You get more Dutch the further you get outside of Brussels, but it is very predominantly French. I actually have a really good friend who moved out here quite a while ago, and she currently lives in the, I just blanked on the word, like the suburbs of Brussels, and it is very French speaking where she lives. So but there is Dutch. There's still, Dutch channels. The road signs are in French and then Dutch. It's still, it's a very interesting aspect of the country because it's essentially split in two in terms of language, because Dutch and French have very, very little to do with each other. And in more recent history, there's been some movements to separate Flanders into its own country, since it's so different from the rest of the country, but it's never seemed to ever work out. And it's, if you've got a good thing going, just keep it going. There's no reason to change it if it's working out well. So essentially that is the geography of Belgium. Like I said, it is kind of a smaller country, especially considering that it's in Western Europe, where there are lots of very large countries. We have like France, Spain, Germany. But there are lots of little countries. There are much smaller countries than Belgium in Western Europe, but for the sake of scale, it's about the size of the United States state of Maryland. So it's big, but it's not large, if that makes sense. So it's one of those places where, if you want to just like get out for the weekend, you can just drive to Paris or Amsterdam or wherever. You can just have like a quick trip to a major city somewhere else in Europe, which I'm so jealous of. That sounds amazing. So let's talk about how Belgium became this way, how it became one country with two very different languages in it. Oh, you know what also I forgot? This region over here is a predominantly German-speaking area. It's all very complicated, but anyway. It starts back, obviously, a very long time ago. There have been, signs and evidence of ancient peoples living here, but the very first documented case, I suppose, of people in this region was written by none other than Julius Caesar. He referred to these people as the Belgae, and once he managed to conquer them and take over the territory, he and the Romans referred to it as Gallia Belgica, which is how we get the name Belgium today. So this territory, and like I said, this is a very brief history because if we got into all the details, we'd be here all night. So this is just a brief one. This territory has been snatched up by so many different powers, so let's go through it. So in about the 5th century, it came under the control of the Frankish kings. The Franks, obviously, is what the French came to be. Eventually, the Franks came under the control of the Carolingian dynasty, and the most famous ruler of that dynasty was Charlemagne, or Charlemagne, if you're being French. I'll probably have to do a whole video on Charlemagne. He was such an important figure in old-timey European history, but when he died, he had 3 sons, and they argued over, how they should rule this big kingdom that their father left for them. They eventually signed the Treaty of Verdun in 843, and this area, most of it, came under one of the kingdoms. It became known as La Thuringia. And then more of the, I think it was like the northern region, became West Francia. But by 880, the whole area was under the control of the Holy Roman Emperor. And basically that deal was that it was majority Catholic, as opposed to like Orthodox Christianity, which was like hopping over in Eastern Europe. And it stayed that way for quite a bit. By the 13th and 14th centuries is when this lowland area really started to boom economically. During this ancient time, the city of Bruges was the big major economic hotspot. It made a lot of European powers very jealous, and they wanted this area very much. There was a very famous battle in 302 called the Battle of the Golden Spurs, when the French tried to invade Flanders, and the Flemish people actually won, and it's considered like a very happy historic moment for the Flemish people. But France would eventually take over the territory in time. By the 15th century, the Duke of Burgundy was in control of Flanders. It was known then as Burgundian Netherlands. Or the whatever. The heir to the Burgundian dynasty eventually was Charles V, who was a Habsburg emperor. So the Habsburg dynasty wound up taking control of this territory. Later it came under Spanish territory after a couple of wars and some political marriage rights. And then eventually came under Austrian control for the same reason, due to wars and victories and then marriages and things like that. It's a big to-do. But like I said, it changed hands many, many times. And then finally, all of the Low Countries was annexed by revolutionary France. So after the monarchy was overthrown and they were going through their transition and Napoleon started to become a thing, France snatched up this area and it became part of France. So by 1830, the people in this region had enough. It had literally been 1,000 years plus of being conquered by various people. They were kind of doing very well, doing their own thing with commerce and agriculture. And a revolution came about for an independent Belgium, which would eventually happen that year. They managed to secure their independence. They set up a standard government for the time, but they wanted the traditional monarchy legacy that many of its neighbors had. So they elected a king. They voted who would become King Leopold I to be their king on July 21st, 1831. The country was still predominantly Catholic. It is kind of still today, but that's to be noted because during the Reformation, Protestantism really came into play in what is now the Netherlands and definitely Germany, where it kind of all started with Martin Luther. So it was kind of a big deal that this region was still predominantly Catholic. And it was also predominantly French-speaking, even though there was this massive population of Dutch-speaking people who speak a type of Dutch known as Flemish in some parts of it. So they were very vastly ignored until much, much later in the history, where at the start of the kingdom, French was the language that all the official things were done in. It's very different today. So flash forward to 1885. If you've seen any of my videos about African countries, you already know that date because that was the scramble for Africa. It was the Berlin Conference, where all of the European leaders got together with no African leaders and decided to snatch up pieces of Africa and talk it out and negotiate over who should own what of Africa. King Leopold II of Belgium convinced this whole committee to allow him to have what he would call the Congo Free State, what is now known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I've already did a video on it. I talked about this a bit, obviously. He convinced them to allow him to own that massive piece of land as his own private property. And he said that he would use that property to spread Christianity and to, convert the natives and establish missions and improve their quality of life, blah, blah, blah. They all bought it. They let him do it. And he did not do that. He did some really horrific things in that part of the world. Just to briefly and relaxingly summarize, automobiles started to become a thing not long after that. And in order to make automobiles work, you need tires, and tires are made out of rubber. So he turned basically this entire massive country into one huge rubber plantation. And he overworked these people to death. He started a militia that would very brutally oversee how everything worked. And literally millions of people lost their lives during this time, and many millions more were maimed and had their hands cut off. I talk about it more in detail in the Democratic Republic of the Congo video because that's more of their story to tell. I'll just leave it at that. If you want to know more details, check that out. But yes, it was a humanitarian crisis. And it took some brave missionaries, who were actually there to convert the people and improve their lives, like the original plan was, to sound the alarm up in Europe, getting the attention of journalists that got the news out. And when people found out what was going on, they were very horrified, as anyone would be hearing what was going on there. So the government of Belgium seized the colony back from Leopold II. Even though he had made a ton of money off of this project. Like, he was literally set for life. Like, it didn't matter to him, at least, that all of these accusations of what we would now call war crimes and crimes against humanity happened in his name because he got filthy rich from it, and he lived out the rest of his life being filthy rich. Also, he used a lot of that money to improve the infrastructure of Belgium, and built a lot of really beautiful buildings, especially in Brussels, that are still there today. Lots of gorgeous, gorgeous architecture and monuments, things like that, were made from that kind of money. So it's a really sad part of their history. But yes, the government took control of that to try to undo all of that horrificness that happened. However, by August 1914, World War I had rolled around, and Germany invaded Belgium and basically destroyed the country. And it was a major, major battleground area because you have the Allies up here, you have the Germans, so to say, the Austrians, the Habsburgs, what have you, could converge very easily in this territory. So Belgium, northern France, this whole area of Europe became a massive, massive battleground. Yeah. Oh, you know what I forgot to mention was one of the most famous battles of all time happened in Belgium, the Battle of Waterloo, that brought down Napoleon. But there's a little tidbit for you. Anyway, World War I destroyed Belgium. By the time the war ended and the country started to get back on its feet, the Depression happens, and then World War II happens. In May 1940, Germany invaded again, this time much more dire in a way, not in the way that they were just destroying property and turning things into battlefields, but obviously people are being rounded up in the Holocaust and sent to death camps. Very, very horrific things happening in Belgium. It was a very terrible time in its history. And like I always say whenever we bring up moments like this, this is a relaxation channel. I acknowledge horrible things that happened. I mention them briefly and we move on. Not in a way to diminish what happened or make light of it, but just in a way to keep you relaxed and calm while you learn about history the most soothing way possible. It's really hard to talk about things like the Holocaust in a relaxation video. So, moving on. Belgium was liberated by February 1945. Their current king, Leopold III, was eventually, basically forced to abdicate in 1951 because it was believed that he had close ties with the Germans. And since then, Belgium has really picked itself up by the bootstraps and is determined to be like the model citizen, like the star student of the class, right? Belgium was one of the founding members of the United Nations. It was the first member of what would eventually become the EU, and it would join NATO as well during its first year, like its founding member. Those headquarters are actually located in Brussels, so that's a very prominent place in the city. Also, these three countries here, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, formed what would be known as Benelux, which we're going to talk about in another video coming up soon. I just realized I didn't talk about the borders of the country, but anyway, Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, France. Got it. And essentially, Belgium is now, a first world country, very industrialized. It was one of those countries that really picked up the Industrial Revolution during its time and boomed in that aspect. So it's still very industrialized today. Very modern country. They have had some political scandals and a few political crises. They hold the world record for the longest, what is it called? Like a government shutdown. And there have been some terrorist attacks in this area, and a lot of terrorists use this area to hide out to launch attacks on other European areas. It's really unfortunate, but it's something that the Belgian government is really working on. And now, of course, with COVID-19, doing all they can for that. My friend that lives near Brussels tells me about how, things get lifted and then things get bad and they get put back again and then they get lifted, and it's just that kind of cycle. So that's kind of where a lot of people are in the world right now. So anyway, let's flip through this book and I'll show you some neat pictures of Belgium. I told you that'd be a brief history, didn't I? Very, very beautiful buildings here. This looks like it's in Bruges. Bruges is a really interesting city. If you've ever seen the movie In Bruges, it's a hilarious action movie, but you'll see there, because they filmed it there, most of it is still intact from its medieval prosperous times. So it's a really beautiful historic city to go see. It's mostly a tourist city. Here's the architecture I was telling you about, that Leopold II helped build with his money. Just all of these really beautiful styles of buildings. This is the City Hall in Antwerp. And this is from a protest to not split the country between Wallonia and Flanders. One country of each would be two Belgiums. Long live Belgium. And this is what happened after a terrorist attack in March 2016, where they attacked the metro and the airport. Anyway, look at this. This is in Bruges, it says in the caption. Look how peaceful that looks. So serene. Here we can see a political map of Belgium. You can see lots of the major cities. I didn't talk about its rivers either. The Scheldt would be the most important river, at least in my opinion, because it helps Antwerp become a port. But there's many, many rivers that crisscross Belgium. This is on the Meuse River in Wallonia. I'll show you that. The Meuse River also cuts through, straight through Belgium, and creates beautiful sceneries like this. Here's talking about rivers. This is also the Meuse. This is the Charles de Gaulle Bridge, it says. This is in that highland area I was telling you about, known as the Kemperland. Really pretty. Ooh, this is in Brussels. More of that architecture I was telling you about. Very, very, very French, isn't it? With this park. It looks very Versailles style. Still very beautiful. Let's see, this is in Ostend in Flanders. History. That's so pretty. It looks like haunted almost. Do you know what I mean? I don't know how to describe it. Anyway, Lotharingia in the 10th century. Here's a painting of the Battle of the Golden Spurs and the Battle of Waterloo. And here is a big mound that was built on the battlefield at Waterloo to commemorate the battle. Albert I, King of the Belgians. And this is about how the Belgian government's dealing with terrorism today. The Palace of the Nation in Brussels. You can see the flag of Brussels and the flag of the European Union. Queen Matilda and King Philippe of Belgium. And this is the Prime Minister, Charles Michel, speaking to a session of the Senate. I'm just reading the thing. Anyway, so this is the Walloon Parliament. So each region has its own parliament. So Flanders has its own Dutch-speaking parliament. Wallonia has its own French-speaking parliament, just to make things fair for everybody so one region isn't dominating over the other. Here's at the European Union. You can see all the flags of the nations flying in front of the building. Chocolate is one of the things that Belgium is very, very famous for. Belgian chocolate is delicious. I know I've had it straight from Belgium. They're also famous for waffles and French fries. They claim to have invented French fries or crisps over in that part of Europe. I don't think it's exactly proven, but somebody invented it. You may as well let somebody get bragging rights to it. A cargo crane in Antwerp. Bicycles are a big deal in this part of the world. I'll talk about it more with the Netherlands because I think more people ride bicycles in the Netherlands than anywhere else in the world, but definitely a lot of people in Belgium ride bicycles everywhere. These are tourist bikes that you rent out, so you can get a bicycle tour. Nuclear station in Antwerp. It says this plant was taken offline in August 2014 due to unexplained malfunctioning and possible sabotage, but it was restarted in 2015. Belgium is very environmentally conscious about recycling. And this is one of their trams. It's kind of cute. Harbor seals living in the North Sea. Very sweet. And here's a really gorgeous beach in Flanders. It's considered one of the most beautiful beaches in Belgium because there aren't a lot of beautiful beaches in Belgium. Very lovely smile there. Looks like she made some paper craft flowers. That's fantastic. This is in Leuven, it says. Very gorgeous day outside. And this is in Mons, which is the capital of Wallonia. You can see the flag of Wallonia, the flag of Belgium, the flag of the EU. And this is Eupen in that region. You see this lady here holding Belgian chocolate, whatever. This is in the German region I was telling you about. They annexed that territory in like post World War I, and they've since, I believe, they've made German one of the official languages. So there's 3 official languages in Belgium, just to incorporate that little area. Here's another thing about the terrorism crisis going on. Molenbeek is a neighborhood that is predominantly Muslim, and many terrorists take that opportunity to hide out there. It doesn't mean everyone there is a terrorist, just, anyway. A lovely, lovely day, having a nice picnic. We've got some apples, some pretzels, some, let's see, a little seedy bun, got some cheese, and some soda, maybe some fruit juice or something, I don't know. Very beautiful, an evening in Ghent, it says. Lovely buildings. And this car's had an accident and it's getting towed. Poor car. This is talking about the welfare that Belgium offers its older citizens. And this is a field trip in Brussels, getting some hands-on experience in its history. Religion, very beautiful statue. This is in Bruges, it says in the caption. Another example of Bruges ancient architecture. This is an old house. It's still very much unchanged. This is an altarpiece in Ghent, it says. During like the 1400s, 1500s, that like Flemish area of Belgium had an exploding art scene. Art sort of like this. That was the style. Not a concentration camp, I believe, but like a processing camp in a way to send people to extermination camps. Language, very convoluted. You can see lots of Dutch here. I think they're all in Dutch. That's in German, French. That's in French. Yeah, there's French. Anyway, let's see. This is not in French, so I can't read it. Flemish demonstrators protest against the use of French during a city council meeting. So this is a very good map of what I was telling you about. Flanders, Wallonia, the Brussels region, and the German region. And you can see that there are some exclaves of each region there. So in some other countries, and I always use the example of California because we have NorCal and SoCal, how they're like almost like two different cultures, but there's no like line. It's just kind of a state of mind. In this case, there are actual lines. So while it is like a cultural and a state of mind and a linguistic thing, there are actual borders between all the regions. Here's a cool little example of a street post sign, how everything, this is in Brussels, so it's in French and then in Dutch. And as you can see, they're very different languages. I mean, you can understand some of them, but yeah, they're two very different languages. Names, so yeah, I think this talks about how in Belgium they use like 3 or 4 names. Oh, and it also talks about how just based on their last name, that doesn't mean that you're from that region, since many families have intermarried. So someone could live in the French region, speak French, and have a Dutch last name, and vice versa. Very common, actually. Playing some music. This is a really famous painting. If you know your art history, you recognize this one immediately. Along with this one, this is by Magritte. Magritte has a lot of famous paintings. The what's it called? The Son of Man is probably his most famous one, but this is my favorite one. So you can see it's a painting of a pipe, and it says "Ceci n'est pas un pipe," which means this is not a pipe. So what does that mean? Because this is obviously a pipe, but it's not. This is a painting of a pipe. It's not a pipe. It really kind of like forces you to break the fourth wall of art, and it's my favorite Magritte painting. I think it's funny. This is Adolf Sax, the inventor of the saxophone. Here is Jean-Claude Van Damme, arguably the most famous Belgian of all time, probably, along with Hergé, who did the Tintin comic books. Probably Tintin's the most famous Belgian of all time, but Jean-Claude Van Damme's a close second, along with Mannequin Peace. This picture is kindly cropped. The most important part of the statue, it's of a little boy relieving himself, hence the name. And he has outfits that people have put on him. It's kind of like a thing. And also apparently no one knows why the statue's here or who put it up, and there's a lot of urban legends about it, but he's a beloved little part of Brussels. Having a nice day outside. Lovely green grass. A Belgian sheepdog, isn't it sweet looking? A bicycle race. And this is Sven Koens of Ghent. It says I probably got that wrong. Pigeon racing is a thing in Belgium where pigeons are like bred to race, and the pigeons are taken like far away and then released, and then whoever makes it back home in time wins. It's a very old, I wonder if it says when it started in this. I don't see any dates, but a very kind of old sport that's still going on today. This is on Belgian National Day in Brussels. All kinds of costumes that they wear. That's so neat. Santa Claus. or Saint Nicholas as he's known there. I wonder if they have his actual name. Francis, Père Fouetter. Oh no, that's the bad one, isn't it? So in Belgium they have black peat, which is very contentious, especially for my friend who lives in Belgium now because she's African American and now her daughter is half African American and has dual citizenship and doesn't want her daughter like thinking about Black Pete looking like her because he's like the naughty friend of Santa. And from what she says, it's like becoming less and less of a thing in Belgium because it's like very obviously racist, even though some people want to like keep that tradition around. Anyway, hi Janae, if you're watching this, thank you. Anyway, a military band wearing very large hats. Here's another weird little festival, the Binge, I suppose, if it's French, where like people run around and cause mischief and wear these really weird masks. Old traditions. Some traditions are so old they don't even know how it got started. Look at these waffles. Belgian waffles. Which one's your favorite? I think I like this one with the bananas and the strawberries and the chocolate. They all look so good. They all look good. Anyway. What do we have here? Some meats and cheeses. This is talking about how horse is like a traditional meat in Belgium and some people still eat it even though it's very frowned upon in Western culture. And this is the national dish of Brussels, from what I understand. Mussels and French fries, which I love mussels. I love French fries. I've never had them together. Very interesting taste. I'm sure it works, but they're like two very contrasting tastes to me. Endives, grown in Belgium. And pralines. Yum, yum. So good. What do we have here? Belgian endive and ham gratin. Interesting. Don't know how I feel about that, but that looks good. And some Belgian spice cookies. Very traditional Christmas snack. And that's the end. We've got this great map here. And that's the end of our book tonight. So, I have 2 very long videos coming to you in the next 2 days about Belgium. I like rehearsed them already and they're way too long. I'm probably gonna have to cut some of it because it's super long, but you'll learn a lot more about Belgium in detail in those videos. So if you haven't subscribed already, be sure to do so. And again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good